Well, for more on all these border battles, I'm joined now by Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell from Sydney. Well, December 1, residents of Greater Sydney will all be finally allowed into Queensland. I understand a lot of people, listening to a fair bit of radio, a lot of people will go up north to see their family. This is into Queensland, but a lot of people have been saying online and talkback, Andrew, that they won't be going to Queensland for their usual holiday in protest. They're going to stay in New South Wales. I know some Victorians said to me over the weekend they're going to go to the New South Wales south coast rather than Queensland because they want to stick it up Annastacia Palaszczuk. Do you think her politicking will have any impact, or will people just want to get to Queensland anyway?
Well, New South Wales south coast, really great spot. You just hope there's no more bushfires, I guess. But Queensland, look, the concern for me is what happens if there's a tiny little outbreak, a few clusters, family of 4 or 5, you booked all your accommodation, maybe flights and car hire if you're not driving. How much are you in the lurch if Annastacia Palaszczuk shuts it down again and your holiday is completely ruined? So that's the concern. Look, I've got to tell you, in this newsroom, there's a lot of people from different states work here. There was a huge cheer today when the announcement's made. But I just think Annastacia Palaszczuk is unrealistic with elimination, and I think her opposite number, David Crisafulli, has a point when he says we need a standard. Like we need to know how many cases is too much when you're looking to shut, so that people have some guidance. So people, some people, it's their only holiday of the year, and they outlay a lot of money on it. So it's a bit of a mess still, I reckon.
And I think people are still very wary of what the economy will look like next year. And I think you're right. Something that is demonstrably public, that we can hold her to account, rather than what's been so-called expert advice between her and Jeanette Young, we never even see the detail of. And it's so vague, month to month. All those measures that, down here in Victoria, the same thing happens. The goalposts, keep moving. And I think, yeah, you're right. It's a lot of money that people will outlay for their one Christmas holiday, so we want to get it right. Reports today, New South Wales hotel quarantine, they say the system's at breaking point. Thousands of incidents, 169 guards sacked. I don't actually think that's a bad thing. If it's bad guards, you want them out. And at least 4 overseas arrivals were told to have absconded. And it's raised concerns about the system across the country. ACTU Secretary Sally McManus says security guards should be paid more given the risks, and she points this out, that if a government insists on contracting arrangements, they can also insist on jobs with full-time hours and higher pay, and then governments would need to implement maximum oversight to ensure that's happening. Now, that's rich words coming from the head of the union movement, given Victoria was the, out of all the states, the worst managed, and it's run by a hard-left Labor Premier. How confident are you, or how confident do you think people are about incoming quarantine management?
Well, there's been one documented leak in Sydney and it didn't lead to many cases or even any cases. So I think there's some confidence in Sydney. In Melbourne, I'd be petrified. In South Australia, I'd start to be a bit worried now too. So, look, I've been making the point now for a few days that I discovered that federal authorities initially had an idea to have it in remote locations. I believe it should be in remote locations. If you think about where there's risk, in the middle of a heavily populated city and you have the virus can leak out, it just doesn't make any sense to me, Peter. So I think the other great difficulty is the federal government's in charge of international borders, but the states are in charge of quarantine. That's how it ended up in hotels in capital cities. So, look, more work has to be done on this. Scott Morrison set up National Cabinet. It's got to put its mind to a better system next year, in my view.
Then you're talking about what people coming into facilities in the NT, the Darwin facility, which is, I've been there, it's relatively, 4-star motel accommodation, 3-star motel accommodation. We're not talking about putting them in detention centres. But if they were there and you had the workforce then fully engaged and not working part-time jobs, that's where you're saying you're limiting the risk, is it? And
paid well. The states and the federal government, if need be, share the cost of paying well and build facilities. We need stimulus in the economy. What's wrong with building a few facilities out in the bush?
Go to this story today that the New South Wales Premier came under fire because she didn't isolate last week after undergoing a test for COVID. Let's have a listen.
Strictly, when you take a test, you are meant to self-isolate. I should have shut my door and not seen anybody, and I didn't do that. I actually just proceeded as usual. I had people coming in and out. And because it's budget day, you don't have scheduled meetings, but I'm sure I would have met with people during that time.
Now, poor judgment or a storm in a teacup, Andrew?
I think it's really poor judgment. I mean, you can't go out there every day and say, you know, you've got to obey these rules and then not obey the rules. And she's been caught out again, Gladys Berejiklian. And I know one of your favourite sayings is the cover-up's worse than the crime. Well, Peter, on this occasion, the Australian newspaper was heavied by Gladys Berejiklian's office, presumably with her imprimatur, not to print this story, and it was true. And my concern is that and I know the concern of some cabinet ministers in the New South Wales government, is that there is a dirty culture growing in this government. We've had Gladys Berejiklian revealed to have had knowledge of Daryl Maguire's lobbying activities with developers while an MP and failed to act on it. We've had the shredding of documents by her office in relation to alleged sports rorts grants, or grants, community grants, which are controversial. And now we've got heavying of journalists to try and not run negative stories when they're actually true. So I know there are concerns within the New South Wales government about Gladys Berejiklian's leadership and her role, or what role she can have in enforcing appropriate standards in relation to that government.
Yeah, well, if that's been done by her press office, having run political offices myself, you don't make friends by bullying the media about stories that are true. Abbott was himself a former journalist, former Prime Minister was a former journalist, and he always said that sort of stuff will eventually come out, so you've got to be pretty straight with it. Certainly the Canberra Press Gallery wouldn't let you get away with it. If the story's not true, that's the time that you speak up and you say, where's your evidence to print the story? But where it is true, I think it's a dangerous game to bully journalists not to publish something that they believe, in this case we're proven, to be on the money. Nationals MP Michael McCormack is on a big blitz to get Joel Fitzgibbon's seat of Hunter. I was speaking to a few National Party MPs today. They like the fact that the Nats are out there trying to win seats. They're not entirely sure that McCormack's got the razzle-dazzle that will bring it over the line. What do you think?
Well, Barnaby would be a selling point out there, I suppose you're getting to, Peter, but or others like Littleproud have spoken about. Look, you know, Keith Pitt was there last week as well. I think there's something in Anthony Albanese visiting Patterson as well as Hunter last week, and some of the seats he's visiting. He's playing a bit of defence, Peter. So Joel Fitzgibbon, well, he may just have a point, mightn't he? Because the Nats are looking to target seats like Hunter and Patterson, and Labor's out there playing defence in them. So, you know, the feeling is Scott Morrison can increase his margin, and that's the political situation we find ourselves in at the moment.
Yeah, and I think they're right. I think the Nats are absolutely right to exploit it. But I think the more that Joel rails against Anthony Albanese in the hard left position on a range of things, it helps him. It advertises his brand, separately, I suppose, the Labor brand, but it advertises his brand in the seat. It will just depend between now and what could be the end of next year as to what Labor takes to the election as their environmental or energy policy, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And the short-term target's the issue, and Anthony Albanese keeps avoiding the question. And will Joel run? I mean, he said he's going to run. If he doesn't run, Hunter's in real strife, isn't it? But I think his following would be enough to get the seat over the line. Certainly there are people, after he criticised Albanese, white-anting Fitzgibbon and saying that he's just after a job with a mining company, and that's what his comments are about. So, you know, still some real tensions there. But they really need him to be running in that seat to retain it, I'd say.
An interesting high One Nation vote last time. We saw that vote fall away in the state election. But I reckon if Mark Latham ran in Hunter, all bets would be off. All right.